everyone, my name is Karma Hickman and I'm an associate solicitor in the immigration team at Bindmans. I'm here with the fourth edition of our podcast, Immigration Unpacked, which looks at immigration and citizenship related matters. Hi, this is Karma. I just wanted to make a quick correction to today's podcast in which Tanya and I were discussing the minimum earnings requirement of 12,570. We both refer to people needing to have earned this sum over 3 years, but in fact, the government is looking at whether this period should be 3 years or 5 years. So a few weeks ago, my colleague Tanya Goldfarb and I discussed what we knew about potential changes to how people qualify for indefinite leave to remain. And since then, the government's given us a more detailed idea of what it's planning, as well as announcing a consultation on these provisions. So Tanya, who's our head of business immigration, is back with me to outline what we know. Thanks for joining me, Tanya. So the government proposals are contained in a statement that's called a fairer pathway to settlement, somewhat ironically. And this sets out the government view that people shouldn't automatically qualify for indefinite leave just because they've lived in the UK for a certain number of years. And the government's idea is that they should instead have to show that they've earned the privilege of ILR. And there's a lot to unpack, so we're going to focus on just some of the really big headline changes. And because of time constraints, Tanya and I have agreed in advance that we're going to do our best not to spend lots of time moaning about how cross we are and how unfair everything is.
Yes.
Because we just want to kind of get through, the realities, the practicalities, or what's being said. So this paper proposes a baseline qualifying period of 10 years that people will need to live in the UK in order to qualify for indefinite leave. And the length of this qualifying period could then be adjusted, either reduced or extended, depending on individual factors. So we're going to start by looking at the minimum requirements that apply to all settlement applications, or most. These require people to show they've met the government's suitability requirements. That's the first branch. That they've integrated, that's the second branch, and that they've made a contribution. So the suitability requirements, they are tough. It's a completely clean criminal record, for example, but they do apply to all applications. And the government is threatening to tighten these up further, but we don't have any more detail in this proposal, so we're not going to talk about the suitability requirements today. In terms of integration, migrants will need to meet a higher level English test, which is B2, and also show that they've passed a Life in the UK test, although the government is also consulting on some other ways to show integration. But I think probably the Life in the UK test is the most likely outcome. And Tanya and I also talked about these, the English test last time. So Tanya, I think the big kind of shocker in all this is the contribution, the financial contribution element. So in terms of the minimum contribution that people will be expected to have made, financial contribution, in order to qualify for indefinite leave, what will that look like, Tanya? What is the government saying?
So that will look like the following. If a person must have paid at least £12,570 over the 3 years preceding, they must have had an annual earnings threshold of that figure and must have thus paid taxes and national insurance contributions over the previous 3 years prior to making an application for indefinite leave to remain.
Okay. And that could be through employment or self-employment, I'm guessing.
It could be through employment or self-employment, depending obviously on the visa category that a person is in, whether that permits self-employment or not. But yes.
Sorry, go on.
I do just want to circle back very quickly on suitability, because in addition to not having a criminal record of any description, it also links to having no debts to the NHS, no litigation debts, no HMRC debt, no there can be no liability owing to any government department. And so I think that is an important factor that people need to bear in mind. Do you want me to?
No, I think we'll leave that because we've got a lot to get through, and those are going to apply to everyone anyway. So we'll just focus on the main stuff here. I mean, we could keep going, obviously, loads to say. So that's the minimum. That's the starting point for
that's the starting point.
But even if people have met these minimum starting points, so the suitability, the English test, the Life in the UK test, and paid this 12,750 over 3 years, that doesn't automatically mean someone will qualify after 10 years. And there are some situations that will make that qualifying period longer. And can you tell me a bit about those, Tanya?
So the qualifying period may be even longer than 10 years if a person has claimed benefits at any time in the previous 10 years. And I mean at any time, even benefits to which a person was entitled because they weren't means tested. So child benefit, for example, is not means tested, but one should not claim it if one is on a visa. If there is any element of having arrived in the UK in a way that is considered wrong or an illegal entry, if a person has ever had a visa application refused, if they've had a visa, if they've been required to leave the UK and then come back, those two will either lead to, unfortunately, not being able to get on the pathway to settlement, or could increase it to 15 years or maybe even 20 years.
Okay, and I think there's also a thing in there, isn't there, that if they came in as visitors and then switched, that can also increase.
Yeah. So if a person came in as a visitor and then potentially switched to, say, claiming political asylum, then that could have a huge impact on the pathway to settlement, because it could increase it up to 30 years, which makes it unattainable for many people, and will require increasing visa applications to be made over the course of that 20, possibly even 30 years.
It's really, really depressing.
It's demoralizing.
And I should add, I said at the beginning that the baseline period is 10 years. But in fact, the baseline, I mean, this is separate, but the baseline, just to be clear, the baseline period for refugees will in any event be 20 years.
20 years.
For most.
Yes.
Although with an option to switch to something that we don't really know much about yet.
So there is an option to switch to what the government are calling work and study visa.
An asylum work and
an asylum work and study visa, but unfortunately we don't have the details of that yet. The other point that I was going to make was that if there is any period of overstaying, like
of more than 6
months, at any time in the time frame, that will make the pathway even harder to attain.
Okay, so those are the worst parts potentially. On the brighter side, if there is a brighter side to this, is there are also factors that will reduce the qualifying period. So, for example, if the applicant speaks a higher level English, higher than the B2, they could qualify after 9 years instead of 10 years, to have a year knocked off. And the government's also proposed knocking up to 7 years off the qualifying period for people who hold global talent or innovator visas, so they might be able to qualify after 3 years or possibly 5 years. As consulting on that. And where people earn higher salaries, that can also mean a reduction. And could you tell me a bit about that, Tanya?
Of course, yes. So there are two different thresholds in terms of high earners that the government have identified. There's people who pay top rate of income tax, and then the advanced rate. So if an individual has earned a salary of around, I think the figures have not yet been finalised, but around £50,270 in the previous each of the previous 3 years prior to applying for indefinite leave to remain, then yes, their route to settlement may be reduced to 7 years, so long as all the other what government are calling core pillars for settlement are met, so that the criminality, the integration, community, and suitability, financial contributions. If a person is lucky enough to earn a salary that exceeds £125,000 for the previous 3 years, their pathway to settlement may look like it's a 5-year route. So currently what the pathway is to settlement.
So they might not see a change.
They might not see a change. It should be noted that all the other factors, when a person, just because a person is on a high salary, but say they fall for suitability, all the pillars need to be met. It can't just be you've paid a lot of taxes and you've done a wee bit of volunteering. You can apply after 3 years.
Yeah. So you've got to have those 3 minimums that we spoke about.
Yeah.
And if they're not met, you won't qualify.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, there we'll talk maybe at the end, if we've got time, we'll talk a little bit about possible exemptions. But then once those are met, with the things can then be offset or adjusted against each other.
Yes. Yeah. I think what the government is envisaging is a sort of almost like a pick and mix kind of. You can go up and down.
Sounds much nicer than
it does sound much nicer, doesn't it?
Sorry, go on.
Get my licorice all sorts out. I think what they're envisaging is that people will be able to sort of identify a pathway for themselves. I don't know, I'm spitballing here. So rather than it being, this is the pathway that you fit in, it may be that you start on one sort of salary and then you are lucky enough to be given salary increases that then pitch you into another sort of
right. And actually on this, we've spoken about ways that you can reduce that 10-year period through financial contributions, but there's also other ways people can reduce the period. The government's saying other contributions.
They're saying other contributions like community contributions and volunteering. Unfortunately, we don't know what that volunteering looks like, whether it's volunteering in a local community centre or a food bank or your religious community or a charity. I think the devil will be in the detail.
Yeah. And there's also
a public service. Were you about to say public service?
I was about to say public service.
Public service workers. So certain roles within public services, like certain doctors and nurses roles within the NHS, maybe people have actually worked in government. Again, we're not entirely sure what the detail is going to look like, but that will be a pathway that's reduced back down to 5 years.
But only if it's deemed graduate level jobs at the moment.
At the right level, with the right RQF code that attaches to the sponsorship of the work in the first place. So yes.
Yeah, or indeed it may not be skilled workers, right? It can be the partners of skilled workers or people in other routes who may be doing this kind of work.
Oh yes, but what I'm saying is that the work will need to be considered at a particular level.
Well, that's what they're saying. And then I think one kind of key point that I don't think I've said, I don't think you've said, it's not come out, is that this proposal, or actually not just this proposal, the way to qualify for indefinite leave to remain will now only be restricted to only people who are on a route to settlement, a so-called route to settlement, which is certain defined visa categories, will be able to qualify for indefinite leave. So Tanya, what does this mean for people who are here as students or graduates who aren't on one of these routes to settlement?
So what this means is that it's very likely that the government is going to withdraw an immigration visa application called the long residence rule. It is currently possible if you are in the UK and you've spent a continuous period of time in the UK in visa categories that don't necessarily individually lead to settlement or the right to settlement. So a visitor, a student, a graduate, you can amalgamate time and get to 10 years, continuous residency, meet all the other current requirements and make an application for indefinite leave to remain. So what this means in practice is we think that the route is going to be withdrawn, and so only a visa route that has the end ability to apply for settlement will be able to apply for settlement or indefinite.
And this is huge, right?
And this is enormous.
I mean, like multiple times a month, I am talking to people about this long residence route, because people have come here as children, maybe gone to school here, gone to university here, get a job, and they've spent often more than 10 years, and now what they're saying is none of that time
will count.
And it does expressly say in the consultation that if this, in the paper, if this goes through, which we expect it will, then that it expressly says that 10-year long residence route will be abolished.
Will be abolished. Yes. I mean, so if anybody watching this or listening to us is considering responding to the consultations, one closed yesterday. There are currently 3 live consultations. Sorry, there are now 2 live consultations. There were 3 live consultations. One closed yesterday. That was the Home Affairs Select Committee. The government's Home Office's own consultation, which is the chunkiest one, all 70 pages of it, closes in February, on the 12th of February. And then there's another one, which is another select committee. I think it's the Justice departments, and that closes on the 23rd of February, I believe. Anyway, the reason I'm flagging them now is to say that if you were hoping to make an application under the 10-year rule and you have another year to go on getting to the 10-year point, and or anybody else, we strongly encourage you, we really suggest that you respond to the consultations, make your feelings known, talk about how this will impact you, your own journey to coming to the UK, why you chose to come to the UK, why you've chosen to stay in the UK.
I should just add, like that, Tanya, you said it's 70 pages. It is 70 pages, but don't be put off.
Don't be put off.
There's a whole chunk at the beginning that you could just ignore. It's about the situation now. And then there's like, I think Annex A, just ignore it. Like the meat of it, where it sets out the proposals, is fairly short. I would say maybe
it's 20 pages.
20 pages.
It's about 20. I'm just looking at it now.
And then the questions themselves are quite narrow and quite defined. So don't be put off.
Please don't be put off.
Pages. Do reply. I'm gonna
and some of the questions are for individuals as opposed to organizations. So there will be ones that aren't applicable.
Yeah, and it's not, and lots of them are multiple choice. So yes, you do reply, say something, because the more replies they get, the better the chance we've got of at least having some impact. And Tanya, are there any groups of migrants that won't be affected by these proposals?
There are some. That's the good news. There are 4 different groups that will be unimpacted. Firstly, spouses and partners of British citizens and their children. We don't yet know what the position is going to be if somebody has a visa as the parent of a British citizen. And to be clear, we also don't know what this means for partners and spouses of people who have their own indefinite leave to remain. The consultation document is silent on that. So it could be that British citizens...
I do think they've said that probably that parents possibly won't be affected. I think they say that further on near the
great. Well, that's really fantastic.
Tiny thing. Okay. But yeah,
so there is a silver lining. So it's parents, spouses, partners and children of British citizens. We don't know about those that are settled. So somebody has indefinite leave to remain and then their partner comes over later. We don't yet know about that group of applicants. Anybody who has permission to remain in the UK under the EU settlement scheme, they are also not going to be impacted. Family members of and people who hold British national overseas passport, and then the Global Talent and Innovator Founder cohort. Everybody else, unfortunately, is going to be swooped up if this is
it comes into
force and the timeline will be sometime next year.
Okay, we don't know. We don't really know when
So
that will be yet,
we
do we?
don't know firmly, but it is likely that when the consultation closes, the government will then have to lay whatever relevant pieces of legislation. Now, they could do that with actually having, they could do that without it having to sort of become a law, because they could change the immigration rules, which then doesn't require it to go through Parliament. The likelihood is that we will start seeing some changes come into effect in April of 2026.
Right, right. And I think one of the big questions, and I know you're not probably going to have an answer to this, is whether this will affect people who are already here on skilled worker visas.
So that is the sort of, that's the elephant in the room, so to speak. We don't know if there will be what has always been considered a transition phase, as you identify. Normally, historically, when the government have made changes to the immigration landscape, visa routes, etc., there's a transition, there's a time frame where anybody currently in the country in a route that this would be impactful to, there'll be a cut-off point. So anybody already in the UK up to a certain date will be able to stay on the old requirements and rules versus anybody arriving. There wasn't a transition phase when the latest changes to the skilled worker visa route came in July of this year.
Because some people can't they get still sponsored?
But anybody,
well, let's not go down that. But you're right.
There wasn't
progressing away from.
There's a mini transition phase.
Yeah, mini. That's the
had permission to be in the UK before the 4th of April from the previous year, but anybody caught in between was no longer able to avail themselves of old rules. They were under the new rules. That sort of sets the precedent for there possibly not being a transition phase. And so again, please respond to the consultation.
And they are consulting on that.
This is the very point that they absolutely, they've expressly said that they are consulting on whether there should be a transition phase, transition period, and that is enormously important, not least of all because for individuals who have arrived in the UK who are, let's say, the partner or spouse of a skilled worker or the partner or spouse of a graduate, but who hasn't worked because they have main childcare responsibilities or have just decided not to work and maybe they're studying. The pathway says now that you will have to have worked for 3 years and have earned and made contributions by way of tax and national insurance contributions. And that is enormous.
It's huge. And dependents will have to qualify in their own right, and people have to earn money. I can feel myself getting sucked.
I'm not going there.
Say more.
I'm
really conscious of the time because we were going to try and cap at 15 minutes, and I think we're approaching 25 minutes.
Okay.
So I think I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think I'm gonna call it there, Tanya, because I think the main takeaway is respond to the consultation. Don't be scared by the paper. Get online, do that. Speak to your MP. Talk to other people. Get people to reply. And
if you are eligible now, apply now, or if you are going to be eligible soon, apply as soon as you qualify. So start doing, if you haven't had to pass an English language test, take an English language test. If you haven't yet done the Life in the UK test, sit, study and pass the Life in the UK test. And as soon as you are eligible, apply. Seek legal advice if you're not sure. Protect yourselves and make sure that you respond also to the consultation.
Yes, the more responses, the better.
The more responses, the better.
And a quick reminder of what I said at the beginning, that the government is considering proposals that would require a minimum of 3 years or 5 years income at 12,570, which is not a positive note to end on. Sorry. Thank you, Tanya. That was a lot to get through.
It was a lot to unpack.
There was, and we could have kept going. I know we've both got strong feelings on this. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. we'll be back again in January, and I think we're going to try and have a go at rounding up some of the big changes in 2025, which was a lot to talk about. So again, I suspect we might run over, but we'll try and be concise. Have a great Christmas if you're celebrating.
Happy holidays.
And we'll see you in 2026. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.